Well, Ben Harris-Quinney is the chair of the Bow Group, spoke to me earlier and told me he had been aware of bullying within the Conservative youth movement.
Well, I mean, it's the harassment that I think has become commonplace in and around the Conservative Party is something that I've been a victim of, and many others have been a victim of also. I mean, in my experience, it goes back to the entirety of my time involved in politics, which is about 10 years. But I did notice, I think a lot of people as well noticed, a significant change in the last few years where attacks against anyone in politics have become, I think, a lot more personal than they once were.
So how old were you when the bullying first began?
Well, I first got involved in politics in my very early 20s, and you know, I've always pushed back against the harassment, and that has led to a huge amount of smears against me in the national press. But I think as I've grown older, I've pushed back more. Part of the tragedy of what we're looking at with the death of Elliot Johnson and many of the other victims is that, of course, they're very young, they're in the very early 20s, and when you're at that age, I think it's much more, you're much more given to manipulation, you're much more vulnerable to this sort of harassment. And I think,
what are we talking about, Ben? Spell it out to us. What happened to you? What did they do to you?
Well, in my case, I was warned that unless I stopped writing critical articles about the Road Trip 2015 plan, about the Westminster paedophile scandal, about the centralised structure of the Conservative Party, that I would be pilloried in the press for being a racist and homophobe. That's the particular attack they used on me, and I have received several witness statements that people were asked to make complaints to the Conservative Party on those grounds about me.
So you're claiming that people were put up, were manipulated, manufactured accusations against you because you wouldn't toe the line?
That's exactly right, yeah.
Some people won't believe you.
Well, it's now a matter of public record. I mean, there's still a little bit on this to come out, but much is already in the public domain. I can't go into excruciating detail about it just because of the length of your program. But anyone that Googles me, I think, can pretty much see what the case is.
Well, spell it out for us.
Well, I was threatened first by telephone, and then Mark Clark met me in person, and he made clear in no uncertain terms that if I don't toe the line, if I don't start supporting Grant Shapps, if I don't start supporting the Road Trip 2015 project, if I don't stop writing negative articles about the Westminster paedophile scandal and other concerns that I have about the Conservative Party, then I would be attacked by many different sources in a way that I wouldn't be able to respond to or hold back.
Well, Mark Clark has rejected allegations of all bullying and intimidation, says it didn't happen, totally rejected it.
Well, he has, but I think we're at a point now where there has been so many reports that this sort of behaviour has gone on that he is going to have a very, very difficult job explaining why all these people have made these reports and why there is so much evidence that this was taking place.
What about the road trip that Mark Clark organised, busing Tory activists, young Tory activists around the country? What happened there?
Well, it was very much brought about because the membership of the Conservative Party is about halved since David Cameron took over as leader, and a lot local associations really don't have the strength in numbers to campaign for a national election campaign anymore. And so the strategy that was pushed forward first by Grant Shapps and then adopted and taken up by Mark Clark was this idea of busing young people up and down the country. The problem with that, as I saw it, was first off that the people involved were very, very young. I think it's not really true for many people that they have fully developed their political views, their views on life in general, by their early 20s.
You're quite a colourful character yourself, aren't you? You've had your ups and your downs with the party. You're a Conservative. You're a member of the Conservative Party youth movement, and yet you publicly supported voting UKIP at the general election.
Well, that's not true. I mean, that's part of the smear campaign that has been used against me. I was part of a project that was dubbed Unite the Right, which was a project between myself and Toby Young, the journalist, and James Dellingpole, another journalist. And the idea of that project was to get people to vote UKIP in seats where the Conservative Party couldn't win, and Conservative in seats where UKIP couldn't win. So it certainly wasn't to do with getting people to vote UKIP across the board. It was suggesting a system of vote swapping to keep Ed Miliband and the SNP out. I mean, many Conservative MPs supported that idea as well.
Is there a tape of you, Ben, speaking at an anti-gay rights conference in Moscow?
There's a tape of me speaking at a church in Moscow. It certainly wasn't an anti-gay rights conference. It was a conference about Christian values and family values in society. I've made quite clear what my views are on same-sex marriage, and indeed that's when the first attacks from what I would deem to be the chairman's office of the Conservative Party began.
But you were suspended by the party, weren't you?
I was suspended on the grounds of accusations that people have made complaints about these news stories. And news stories were completely spurious. There's no truth in them whatsoever.
So what is the culture within the Conservative Party? What are you saying to me here?
Well, the culture is that if you fall out of line, you are viciously attacked to the point that your person your credibility is destroyed in the public sphere. And I think the problem is that it's not. We've moved from a time when I first got involved in politics, where there was certainly a strong debate about views and values, issues like membership of the European Union. But the debate was about the issues. No one was trying to destroy someone's character or someone's credibility or ability to conduct their lives outside of politics. And what's changed, I think what's become very nasty and very difficult, is that there are certain people that take this approach, and very senior people in the Conservative Party, that they really play for keeps. It's not just about disagreeing with people on policy. They will attack you and attempt to completely destroy your life. And I think that is what Elliot Johnson was looking at. That's what he was being threatened with, and that's what he was desperately trying to avoid. Was
Grant Shapps right to resign?
He was certainly right to resign. I don't think someone like Grant Shapps has any place being in Parliament or anywhere near politics. But I don't think his resignation will go any way to solving the problem. What you need is complete institutional and structural change in the Conservative Party. The problem is that power has become so centralised that there's very little accountability to those that are in the most powerful positions. We used to have a situation where we had very, very strong local associations, and those local associations would hold the Westminster Conservative Party to account. Those local associations have gradually had their authority stamped out.
You would be the last person, surely, given what you're saying tonight, Ben, you would be the last person, surely, to do any bullying back through the media. There shouldn't be trial by media, should there? And Mark Clark, as it stands tonight, denies all of these allegations. Nothing has been proven against him.
No, I certainly wouldn't be the last person to use the media because, unfortunately, I am at a point, and I think a lot of people are at a point, where they see the media as the last possible place that this can be exposed and investigated. I don't think many people, including Ray Johnson, has any confidence in the Conservative Party to fully investigate and solve this. The media might not be an ideal forum, but it's the best forum there is to see these people held to account.
OK. Ben, what should happen now? Final question.
I think Conservative Central Office should be abolished. I think it should be decentralised. I think they should keep just the press operation for the Conservative.
This is a party you support, isn't it? You're one of them.
Yes, but I think it is in support of the Conservative Party to get rid of Conservative Central Office, keep the press operation and decentralise the rest of it to the regions. So you've pushed power down and out, because as long as the power stays very centralised in the hands of a few people, doesn't matter if Lord Feldman resigns, doesn't matter if Grant Shapps resigns, they'll just be replaced by new people who will carry on in the same structure and culture.
Can you see more heads rolling over this?
Certainly. I think it's very difficult to see how Lord Feldman and Robert Halfon can continue in their current position as honest brokers in solving this crisis when they've clearly been complicit in it. I mean,
well, they would deny being complicit in any of this.
I'm sorry?
They would deny being complicit in any of this.
Well, they may deny that, but I think it's been demonstrated in the press that they have had prior knowledge of everything that was going on. They did have prior knowledge of the type of character that Mark Clark is, and so they still have very, very serious questions to answer, and I don't see them being able to answer those questions to the satisfaction of the parties that are concerned. And therefore, I don't see any way that any internal inquiry can be seen as being legitimate with the figures that were complicit or allegedly complicit being still involved.
OK, interesting stuff. Ben Harris-Quinney, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, listening to that, Simon Hattenstone from The Guardian, who's been investigating this story. Good evening to you, Simon.
Hi, Stephen.
To what extent does bullying permeate the culture of the youth branches of the Conservative Party? From what we've just heard, it's big time.
Well, I just want to say at the outset that the heart of this story, I started by investigating the death of Elliot, and I want to say, and I think all our thoughts should be with Elliot's family, his mum and dad, Ray and Alison, and their two daughters, who are, there's a hell of a lot of suffering that's been going on, and no one has been suffering more than them. I also want to say I'm not a political journalist, I'm not an expert on this, but what I have done over the last few weeks is speak to loads of young Conservatives, and it's actually been quite traumatic even speaking to them, because you can almost smell their depression, their anxiety, their lack of self-belief, their paranoia, and this has become somehow institutionalised. They've all been through this road trip. They all seem to have been bullied, and I think it would be wrong. I know there are all these allegations about Mark Clark. Whether he is guilty or not, from what I've heard, it doesn't start and stop with Mark Clark. And it's heartbreaking listening to these people who, wanted to go into politics, the ones that I've heard from, because they were interested, excited by it, and have come away feeling utterly traumatised. And obviously, in Elliot's case, he suffered the ultimate trauma.
And was there a trend to the bullying that you were hearing from different parties of what they had endured? Like what was the common trend of the modus operandi?
I actually think Ben summed it up very well. It tended to be smear campaigns, and with a lot of the women, there was sexual harassment. It seemed as if Road Trip was incredibly and inappropriately sexualised it seemed that when...
Sexualised in what way?
In that young people were being I don't want to get into legal problems here, but a number of young people told me that they were groped or molested by older people without any invitation to have been. Then they were... one person told me that one of the leaders had...
Let me just stop you there, because you're right about legal issues, and we shouldn't say anything about it.
Let's get away from this.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me just qualify this as well. That we certainly at the BBC, obviously, what Simon is doing is he's telling us what he has heard, but we do not have any information, certainly to pinpoint on any individual whatsoever. Any type of impropriety of a sexual nature. So let's move on from that, Simon.
I mean, I would say there were a lot of smears as well. What Ben was saying was accurate. People were told that if they didn't do certain things, if they didn't follow a party line or a certain candidate or toe the line, that, they would be smeared. And in Ben's case, he told you, they put out that he was a racist homophobe. I don't believe he is. He said that he was against gay marriage, which, I disagree with him on this, but he was against it on Christian principles. The racism was totally unfounded, but he had said in those Tory seats they can't win, vote UKIP. So there were incredible assumptions made with people like Ben.
Well, Simon, what you're saying is deeply, deeply shocking, because if I just say the obvious out loud, this is the party that this is our government, for goodness sake. This is the party associated with our government. Yeah,
no, it is incredibly, it's disturbing and it's depressing. And I think one of the things, for me, let's say again that any allegations against Mark Clark, has not been charged with anything and nothing has been proved. But what is known is that Mark had a bad reputation beforehand. He'd been taken off the candidates list. And what is worrying is that right up to the top, people were willing to bring him back simply because they thought he could run a good campaign. And to me, one of the essential issues is, where does the moral element come in? When do we say, actually, we think someone might not be appropriate, might cause a problem, so let's act, because we've got young people here, even if they're not young, even if they're older, let's protect people. So that's one issue. The second issue, I would say, which is a huge issue for the Tory party, is once there were complaints, what did they do? And we've heard so many different stories about this that that's where they have to act.
Simon Hattenstone from The Guardian, thank you very much indeed. Tim Bale listening to this, Professor of Politics at Queen's University of London. Tim, how important is the youth movement within the party?
Well, it's not as important as it once was. If we're talking about a golden age in the 1950s, there were, almost 100,000 members, perhaps, of the Young Conservatives. Now, Conservative Future, which is mainly based in universities, but there are some groups outside university as well, could be as low as around 2,000 people. So there aren't that many people in the actual structure. But as Ben and Simon have been talking about, these road trips weren't just involving people who were actually members. There were people who were kind of coming in just for the election.
And those road trips themselves, Road Trip 2015, how important were they to the general election? What type of impact do you reckon they had?
Well, look, you've got a Conservative Party which is smaller than its Labour counterpart. You've got a Conservative Party that is much older than its Labour counterpart. We did a survey of Conservative Party members back in May, and only 10% of Conservative Party members are aged between 18 and 24, whereas 50% of them are aged over 60. So you can see they've got a problem in terms of people who are kind of energetic, active, and have the time maybe to get involved in elections. elections. There is quite a lot of research evidence to suggest that in a very close election, which, arguably this one looked like it was going to be, boots on the ground can make a bit of a difference. And the Conservative Party, I think, understandably felt that Labour had more boots on the ground and it had to do something about that. Therefore, this road trip solution, this busing of people from marginal constituency to marginal constituency was one solution. It wasn't the most important thing the Conservative Party did to win the election in terms of campaigning. That was all done on direct mail, Facebook, etc. But, in some marginal seats that they were defending and hoping to take, it may have made a difference.
OK, Tim, thank you very much indeed. We'll pause there at 8:33. Here comes the news from the BBC.
On digital, online, smartphone and tablet. This is BBC 5 Live.
And with the 5 Live headlines, I'm Stuart Clarkson. Grant Shapps has resigned as International Development Minister, saying the buck stops with me after being accused of ignoring warnings about bullying while he was Conservative Party co-chairman. It follows the death of a young activist, Elliot Johnson, who claimed in his suicide note he was being bullied by Tory campaigner Mark Clark. Mr Clark has been expelled by the party but denies any wrongdoing.